also going to make sure we pop that right in the chat window right now so you can read more after the call. In our hour together here, I'm going to just kick us off with some very brief background on how this study came to be, and then I'll turn things over to the co-principal investigators on this study, Dr. Carla Martin, to set the stage. And after that, she'll pass it off to Dr. Caitlin DeAngelis, who is the other co-principal investigator, to give us an overview of the study and walk us through some of the findings and highlights. And then Dr. Martin will be back on to share the team's research projects and a few resources that are currently in development. And we'll make sure that we leave plenty of time at the end of the presentation for questions. So please add your questions to the chat window at any point. But please do keep them focused on this study and the research that led to it. I think many of you on this call know that this study is one of several efforts underway in the Boston area to recover and share Black history. But what makes this study distinct is its focus on the Black community that's connected to what is now Longfellow House, Washington's headquarters. But it also looks at how the people featured in this study connect to broader histories of Cambridge and Boston, of New England, of North America, and ultimately of the transatlantic world. The idea for this study first started to take shape in 2017 during a management planning session about the site's future. But as with all good things, it took some time to secure the funding, develop the scope, and bring the team together for this project. And along the way, we had the pleasure of getting to know many of the descendants of Cuba Vassall, who was enslaved at the site in the mid-1700s and seized her freedom here with her family. And many of Cuba's lineal descendants are on the call this evening, and I will just say that their partnership has really been fundamental throughout this project. So back in about 2021, the National Park Service staff here at the Longfellow House and the descendant community together developed a vision for this study. And that vision was that the study would answer both the National Park Service's questions about the property's early Black history, as well as the descendants' questions about their own family history. And I will just say that the result has been one of the most thorough and innovative and collaborative projects that I have seen in my 20 years of doing this sort of work. I'm a believer that both process and product matter, and in both regards, honestly, this study could not be better. As you'll hear today, it represents years of work across archives and historic sites, not just here in New England, but also in the United Kingdom, in Jamaica, and Antigua. So the authors truly took this interdisciplinary approach to their research and writing. And I'll just add that, work like this is rarely done outside of academia, and it's even more rarely presented in a format that's so readable for everyone. So as I mentioned, the research team who drafted this study was co-led by Dr. Martin and Dr. DeAngelis, with support from Dr. Aabid Allibhai, Rayshauna Gray, Dr. Eshe Sherley, and they were all working under the name of the Institute for Cacao and Chocolate Research, and in partnership with the National Council on Public History and the National Park Service's own Northeast Region History Program. And we at the National Park Service and the Longfellow House are just deeply grateful to the descendant community, the research team, and the many, many project partners for all of the collaboration that it took to bring this study to life. I really wish there was enough time to acknowledge everyone by name this evening, but there certainly aren't enough words to thank everyone for their partnership. It's truly been a pleasure and an honor to work together on this project. So before I hand it over to Dr. Martin, just a couple Zoom ground rules. This is a very large virtual meeting, so I don't think you will be able to, but please keep your microphones muted. But please, share your questions in the chat window as they start to come to you. But I would ask again that you please keep the questions relevant to the subject of this report. Towards the end of our time together, the authors are going to do their best to address as many questions as possible. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Carla Martin, who is a social anthropologist, lecturer in Harvard's Department of African and African American Studies, the president of the Institute for Cacao and Chocolate Research, and the co-principal investigator on this study. So Dr. Martin, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's so wonderful to follow you in talking about this study, which has been, for many of us, a very significant experience in our lives. It's an honor to be here with all of you. Thank you for taking time on a cool, rainy New England Thursday evening to talk with us about something that is so important to so many of us. I just want to quickly take us through some additional gratitude to emphasize exactly how many people and organizations were supportive of this research. I was trying to estimate, and I believe that we have talked to hundreds of people throughout the process of doing this research from many different institutions, but I want to highlight a few. Our research strategy and editing team included Rayshauna Gray, who you've heard about, Aabid Allibhai, Eshe Sherley, Jose Lopez Ganem, Jalen Coughlin, and Freda Brackley. And we want to give them all a warm, kind of absentee round of applause. And then I also want to thank all of our colleagues from the National Park Service and the National Council on Public History who have been extraordinarily supportive as we have done this and have been, in many ways, equal partners in the thought process of how to do something like this. We also need to thank folks from the Cambridge Historical Commission, Cambridge Public Library, Harvard University Archives, Harvard University Native American Program, History Cambridge, Houghton Library, New England Museum Association, Royal House and Slave Quarters, Quaker Friends Meeting House in Cambridge, Slave Dwelling Project Conference, Stone of Hope Drumming Circle, and then a number of different partners from the UK, the National Archives, Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, Sheffield Archives, from Antigua, Museum of Antigua and Bermuda, Antigua and Barbuda National Park, and Jamaica, Licklemore Chocolate, Seville Great House, Institute of Jamaica, National Museum of Jamaica, Ware Collective, National Library of Jamaica, University of West Indies, Kingston, Jamaica Archives and Records Department. If I forgot anyone, I'm sorry, that's already a mouthful. So please check out our acknowledgments and just take a moment to recognize all of the many people and institutions that have helped us. And then a very special shout out, or as they say in Jamaica, big up to the family of Anthony and Cuba Vassall, all of their descendants who have been our co-designers in the research. And we'll say more about that in just a moment. I will now turn it over to Caitlin DeAngelis, who was co-principal investigator in this study. And I hope it is clear to all of you how very much Caitlin's fingerprints are over every part of the work that we have done. Her thoughtful writing, her encyclopedic knowledge, her deep storytelling. This is a really unique person you're about to hear from and a wonderful scholar. And so please warmly welcome Caitlin DeAngelis. Go ahead, Caitlin.
Thank you, Carla, and thank you to all of you for being here. I'm so glad to see so many faces and people who have been involved in this project or have been involved in other projects doing similar work. And not to belabor you with acknowledgments, but I just want to acknowledge the expertise of many of the people on this call. This report, as you will see if you've already read it or if, when you look at it, covers a huge sweep of both chronology and geography. But many of you on this call are subject matter experts in particular places. And so even though this report is finished, the work at the Longfellow House does continue. And so we certainly encourage you, if you have a place where you want to dig into something in the report or where you want to dig in and say, like, this isn't exactly right, please do contact. Like, this is an important piece of the work, but it's not the whole work, and it continues. So with that, I want to talk about what's in the report. Some of you have had a chance to read it or look over it. I can't possibly cover everything that's in the report in our time together, but I want to just give you sort of a map of what the report, what's in there, and pull out a few things to highlight for you as you go through, and maybe that may also spur some questions. As Chris mentioned, if you have a question, please just type it in the chat. I can't really see it while because I've got slides, so I can't really see the questions, but we'll take them at the end. Okay, so let us start with the cover of the report, which you may have seen, which features the signatures and marks of many members of the Black Vassall family. Anthony Vassall, Cuba Vassall, and their children, grandchildren, and heirs, all on the cover here. Okay, so what is in the report? The bulk of the report is 5 chapters of research. There's other things as well. There's maps, there's family trees. Carla is going to talk a little bit about that when I'm done, but I'm going to cover the 5 chapters in the report. So the first chapter is the only one of the 5 chapters that's sort of a little bit more focused on the white vassals for context, because the white vassals were agents of empire, they were slave traders, they owned dozens of plantations throughout the British West Indies. And so just for the context of how to situate the Longfellow House, 105 Brattle Street, within this sort of global network of slavery, we wanted to make sure that we had that early piece too. The second chapter focuses on Cuba Vassall, and it covers the period from when she was brought from Antigua to Massachusetts in 1737 up until 1773, the beginning of the American Revolution. Chapter 3 is the crisis of 1774. This is the year when the white vassals leave Cambridge and the people that they enslaved here in Cambridge stay in Cambridge. Chapter 4 covers Cuba and Anthony Vassall and the other people who were enslaved at 105 Brattle as they worked to secure their own liberty during and immediately after the American Revolution. And chapter 5 follows their children, grandchildren, heirs, and community as they built free Black Massachusetts in the first half, well, the end of the 18th and the first half of the 19th century. So I'm going to start with chapter 1, just a couple of takeaways that you should look for as you're reading. One of the things that was really important to convey was that the white vassals were important slave traders. They weren't minor slave traders or incidental slave traders. Their relative, Samuel Vassall, was the president of the Guinea Company, which had a monopoly on British slave trading from the coast of West Africa in the 1640s and 50s. And he actually was really instrumental in turning the British slave trading into a major industry. And so we wanted to make sure that we talked about how the vassals are connected to Atlantic slavery at the very highest and most complicit level. There is actually a memorial for Samuel Vassall at King's Chapel in Boston. This memorial was erected in 1766 and it's still there. I just took this picture a little while ago. You can go and visit it. There's also a wonderful new statue at King's Chapel that was just unveiled earlier this month to honor the free people of color, the Black congregants of King's Chapel, and the people who were enslaved by the people who were congregants of King's Chapel. So it's not Samuel Vassall is not the only statue there right now. Okay. The white Vassall family, the extended family, related to John Vassall, who built the Longfellow House, 105 Brattle, his extended white family owned at least 24 plantations in Jamaica, Antigua, and Barbados. So this was a very large family with many plantations, and they enslaved tens of thousands of people. This is a map of Jamaica from 1763 that just shows some of the plantations that the white vassals owned in Jamaica. Most of their plantations were in the western part of Jamaica, St. Elizabeth, Westmoreland, and Hanover parishes. And when we went to Jamaica with many descendants of the Black Vassalls family, we visited some of these places, as well as working in the Jamaica National Archives and the National Library of Jamaica. So John Vassall, the guy who built the Longfellow House, in 1759, they're all named John Vassall. Everyone in the family is named John Vassall. So in the report, you'll see him referred to as John Vassall, 1738 to 1797. And his father, John Vassall, enslaved 1,167 people at the time of his death in Jamaica. He died in Boston, but the people were enslaved in Jamaica in 1747. This meant that at the time of his death, he was the 4th largest slave owner that Jamaica had ever had. Okay, so this is the level um, of exploitation and enslavement that we're talking about. And John Vassall himself, the guy who commissioned the building of the house, he owned two principal plantations. Some of the other stuff from his estate got sold off, but there were two plantations that he owned: Newfound River in Hanover Parish and Lower Works. And over the course of his lifetime, we are estimating that he enslaved approximately 3,000 people, nearly all of them in Jamaica, as well as several people here in Massachusetts, which we will talk about, which is the subject of most of the report. But we do want to acknowledge sort of the vast majority of the people he enslaved were in Jamaica. This is just a close-up of that map of Newfound River. This map is from the Library of Congress. It's free and accessible to the public. One thing that we wanted to do is show the very close connections between the house that John Vassall built that became the Longfellow House in Washington's headquarters and his plantation at Newfound River. And so when we were in Jamaica, one of the things that we did is we looked at the crop returns, which is the listing of everything that the plantation produced. And so in the year that the house was built, 1759, Newfound River produced 120 hogsheads of sugar, almost 9,000 gallons of molasses. It was a crop that was worth about 3,200 pounds. And at that time, John Vassall enslaved about 130 people at that plantation. But over the next 10 years, he expanded the plantation tremendously, expanded and expanded. And so within 10 years, he had doubled the production of sugar at that plantation. So it's not just something that he inherited. It was something that he was working on and working to make more sugar, make more profit. And the principal way to do that was to enslave more people. While we were in the Jamaica National Archives, we were able to find the names of ships that he used to ship his sugar. And so here's the house that he built. And here's an ad for this ship, True Britain, which is one of the ships that was carrying sugar from Newfound River. It's not just that it was carrying sugar from Jamaica. We have the crop return from 1763 saying, this is how much sugar we loaded on True Britain, bound for Boston. Here's the name of the captain. You can find this all in the report, but just it's a very clear connection, not just sort of knowing that they're connected, but this is the ship. This is how much sugar. This is how much it was worth, and this is how much he paid. And so when he built the house, this is a document from the UK National Archives. It's very hard to read. You don't need to read it. It says house and buildings at Cambridge, and then it has a list of all of the craftsmen that he paid, everyone who built the roof and laid the floor and painted, and all of that money that came from the sugar profits that went to all of these craftsmen in Cambridge. Ordinary people, masons, bricklayers, all paid out of this sugar profit to build the house. And that's how much money he spent on the house. Okay. But now we're going to move on to the bulk of the report, which is about the people who were enslaved by John Vassall and other members of the White Vassall family. And so you'll see that chapter 2 is focused on Cuba Vassall. And we know she was born in 1733 or 4 in Antigua, and she was brought to Massachusetts when she was a toddler, along with her mother, Abba, and her older brother, Robin. She also had several younger siblings who were possibly born in Antigua or possibly born in Massachusetts. We're not sure. But her brother, Robin, is someone who, if you've been doing research on slavery in Massachusetts, you may have come across because he was a co-conspirator in 1755 with Mark and Phyllis, who were the enslaved people who killed their enslaver, John Codman, in Charlestown. And Robin is the person who gave them the poison. So this is a page from the testimony from the trial of Mark and Phyllis, talking about Robin giving them the arsenic powder to kill John Codman. So Robin was Cuba's brother. Okay. All of them, Cuba's whole family, they were enslaved first by the royals, but then given to Isaac Royal's daughter, Penelope Royal, who was married to Henry Vassall. They lived across the street from the Longfellow house. So on this map, Longfellow house is in green, and Henry and Penelope Vassall's house is in pink. So they're just right across the street. And the Henry Vassall house is still there. You can still see it on Brattle Street. It's a private residence now. Cuba had several children. James, Flora, Darby, and Cyrus are all children that we are absolutely sure are the children of Cuba Vassall. There are several other children who may or may not have been, and that's one of the things in the report that we can sort of get into in the details, but we're very sure of James, Flora, Darby, and Cyrus. This is a wonderful document that was found by our wonderful collaborators at History Cambridge. It had not seen the light of day since 1914, but on a hunch, we thought that it might be there. So I asked, I was like, can you check? And they found it. It is an account book kept by Henry Vassall between 1756 and 1759. And one of the entries in it is in 1758 for nursing Cuba. Now, Cuba might have been sick, but she might have had a baby, right? Because this is a it's a payment for someone to come in and nurse her, and there's also in the same month a lot of payments to white women for doing laundry and things. So like there, for some reason, either because of a birth or because of an illness, Cuba was not able to work. So we think that this may be James's birth, but we're not exactly sure. There are several other children who may be Cuba's children, but the documentation is not 100% solid. There was definitely another baby who was born in 1777 or 1778, possibly Catherine or Nancy. Now, I know some of you know that in the past, historians have said like it's definitely Catherine. There are some reasons to think that yes, Catherine was their daughter, and some reasons to think maybe not, but all of that is presented in the report. We also identified two other babies who were born in these households. Their mothers are not identified in the documents, but they were definitely born in the household, and their mothers could be Cuba or one other woman. So we're not 100% sure that Cuba is their mother, but when you put them in line with the other children's births, they're all in the middle of the other children's births in ways that they very clearly could be Cuba's children. One, a baby who was born and died in 1761, and another, a baby boy who was born in 1774 and died in 1775. These are just some of the documents. This is a page from John Winthrop's almanac at the Harvard University Archives talking about the baby who died in 1771. And this is from the Mass State Archives talking about the baby who was born in 1774. So okay, so Cuba was the wife of Anthony, or in some documents called Tony Vassall, for many, many decades. But in the report, in chapter 2, we also raised the possibility that she may have had another partner before she was married to Tony, who was James Tulip, who was a man who was enslaved by the white Vassall family, extended members, and in previous things, people have confused James and James. There's an adult James and a child James, right? Cuba's first child is named James. And we make a case that it's possible that James Tulip was James Vassall's father. James Tulip is well known for suing Richard Lechmere, his enslaver, who was a member of the extended white Vassall family, and gaining his freedom through a lawsuit in 1769. So that's actually a theme of the report, is the way that members of the Black Vasall family used the courts strategically to get compensation, restitution, and freedom. And they definitely would have seen James's example as part of that. One of the other legal documents that's really important is the manumission of Flora Vassall in 1772. Flora Vassall was 5 years old. And this is a document talking about how Tony Vassall, Anthony Vassall, went to where she had been given away, right? One of the things the white Vassalls did was they gave away the Black Vassalls' babies when they were very, very young. And so Flora was in Billerica, where she was enslaved by somebody else. And Anthony Vassall went and picked her up. And you can read the report about the finances of that, but our argument is that Anthony and Cuba probably saved money to manumit flora. They were working to do that before the American Revolution, and so this is 1772. This is not, we're not up to the Revolution yet, and they're already working to free their children. And Flora, age 5, was the first to be freed. Okay. So I know that I don't want to take too much time, so I'm going to speed through the crisis of 1774, which is chapter 3. There were 7 people enslaved at 105 Brattle Street in 1774, along with many hundreds of people in Jamaica who we cannot forget about. They are still enslaved in Jamaica throughout this whole time period. The people enslaved at 105 Brattle are Dinah, Malcolm, William, Cuba, her son James, and then 2 small boys. These 2 small boys, one of them is almost certainly Cyrus Vassall. Who is the other one? Some people have said maybe it's Darby Vassall, but Darby was not actually enslaved by John Vassall at this time. He had been given away as a young baby to George Reed of Woburn, and so he was not enslaved by John Vassall in 1774, so it's probably not him. It may be a reference to the baby boy who was born in 1774. This is the list from the document in the UK National Archives, where you can see 2 small boys. In 1774, the Patriots in Cambridge, you know, the revolution started heating up, and the White Vassals fled to Cambridge and went to Boston, and that may be a familiar story to some of you. The important point for this report is that Cuba and Anthony Vassall separate themselves from the White Vassals, right? The White Vassals go to Boston and eventually to Nova Scotia and back to England. Cuba and Anthony Vassall and their family stay in Cambridge. And a really important takeaway from this chapter is that that was not a passive process, right? It's not that they were just left behind in Cambridge. That was a very precarious time, and they had to negotiate, they had to position themselves, they had to actively stay in order to separate themselves. So that's one of the major takeaways of that chapter. I know I don't have very much time. I'll go fast. Okay. Chapter 4 is about the American Revolution and the period immediately after the American Revolution, in which the people enslaved by the White Vassals in Massachusetts had a very precarious legal status, right? The people who had enslaved them kind of just left. They didn't leave manumission papers or anything. So it was kind of ambiguous. Were they enslaved? Were they free? And the documents show sort of the ambiguity in this period. In 1776, we have George Washington coming to the Vassall House to use it as his headquarters. And we don't have any direct positive evidence that Anthony or Cuba Vassall worked for George Washington. There is a Black woman named Dinah who worked for George Washington when he was at the headquarters at the Vassall House. And she's probably the same Dinah who was enslaved there before. We can't, because of surnames and that we can't corroborate that 100%. There were other Dinahs around. It might have been someone else, but it may have been Dinah who was enslaved there before. But Anthony Vassall during this period actually did a lot of work for the royal estate up in Medford. And if you look at the finances of the royal estate, you'll see that there are many, many, many payments to Tony Vassall during this period, 1776 to 7, and that the last one actually is settled by arbitration, which means that there was a dispute over how much the person who was renting the royal estate, Simon Tufts, how much he owed him, and that Anthony Vassall was able to take that to some sort of magistrate or arbiter and get what was owed to him, or at least part of what was owed to him. And so this is yet another example, and we'll see many, many times in the report, of the Black Vassals using courts and petitions and that sort of appeal to them having a right to appear before authorities in order to insist on compensation, restitution, and civil rights. So Cuba, Anthony, and their children lived in a small house on John Vassall's estate during this time. The Vassall estate was seized by the Commonwealth. So for a brief period, it was sort of unclear whether Cuba and James and the other enslaved people were actually owned by Massachusetts, but they used strategic appeals and petitions to argue that they should get compensation from the estate. And a long, complicated story short, they did get did get a pension from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. This is a receipt for one of the pension payments that Anthony Vassall uh, received from the state of Massachusetts, from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and this is in the Harvard University archives. It shows his mark, the capital T, and that is on the cover of the report. Okay. Eventually, Antony and Cuba bought a property on Mass Ave, up sort of between Harvard Law School and Porter Square, and Antony became an independent farrier. When when he was enslaved by the Vassalls, he was a coachman. He took care of horses, so he continued to work with horses as a free man. And this is the deed to their property, which they purchased in 1787. Okay. The final chapter, chapter 5, follows their children and grandchildren as they help to build this free Black community in Massachusetts. Most of them moved to Boston, where there was a larger community, and they were very involved in community organizations like the African Society, which was a fraternal benevolent society, the African Schoolhouse, working for education, and many political causes, right? School desegregation, abolition, the Massasoit Guard, which was a militia group that was formed to protect freedom seekers from slave catchers. They were very involved in a lot of these things. Here is the Laws of the African Society from the Massachusetts Historical Society, showing that both Cyrus and Darby Vassall were founding members, and there are their names right there on the bylaws there. And this is from a petition about school funding from the early 1800s that is signed by Primus Hall, the son of Prince Hall. And actually, Primus Hall's daughter, Abigail, was married to James Vassall. So these families are very closely connected. But at the bottom, you see Darby Vassall's signature as well. So they're really involved in this petitioning culture and involved in a lot of these political actions. They also purchased property on Beacon Hill. The property is very close to where the African Meeting House and the African Schoolhouse are. So if you've been to the national park site there, you're very close to where they were. I mean, the names of the streets have changed, but eventually they turned that property into quite a significant amount of property. They owned several houses and a boarding house, and in the 1840s and 50s, they used this property to help the community in a variety of ways. So Frances Clark, Darby's daughter, owned a house with her husband at 20 Grove Street. And this was a house that was used both to house community members who needed housing and also as collateral when people needed to be bailed out, right? The 1850s, we're talking the Fugitive Slave Act. There's a lot of bail that needs to be paid. And so their property, Frances Clark's husband, Jonas W. Clark, was often called on to bail people out. And as a property owner, he could afford to do that. And he had that collateral. So here, this is just the 1860 federal census. I'm very sorry. It's so hard to read. But you can see at the top, this is Jonas W. Clark. And this is so this is a couple of households, but you can see there are two households living at 20 Grove Street. There's Darby Vassall living with Jonas Clark and Frances, Darby's daughter. Joseph A. Sprague, the next person on the list, the young mariner, that's Cyrus's grandson. Cyrus's daughter died very young, and so her children were raised by the Clarks as well. So there was a lot of cousins growing up together in the same house. And living in the same house with them at 20 Grove Street, a separate household, is the Gray family. Now, Louisa Gray is Louisa Nell Gray. She's the sister of William Cooper Nell, the community activist who was very prominent within the Black Boston community. William Cooper Nell did live at the house for some amount of time. He's not there in 1860, but his sister and her family lived there. And their next door neighbors are actually the Ruffins, who are a free black family from Richmond who moved to Boston. And George L. Ruffin, their young neighbor there, was the first black graduate of Harvard Law School and the first black judge in the US. So they're in the midst of this community that's building power and solidarity through both like petitioning and legal actions and things, and also just like mutual aid and solidarity. So I'm gonna stop there. Um, and I hope that we can take some questions. I'm sorry I went a little bit over. Um, okay. Over to Carla.
Yeah, thank you so much, Caitlin. I hope it's clear as you're all hearing from Caitlin exactly how much detail is in this report. I encourage you all to take some time to dig into it, to look at different chapters. There are print copies that will be available at Longfellow House, but I also encourage you to spend some time with the digital copy and use, Control F and do some finding. If it's too dense to dig into at first, just search for people's names, for places, for topics that interest you. You'll begin to engage with the report in really unique ways as you do that. Now, I'm going to very quickly talk about our research process and the way in which we've communicated throughout it. And that is because while you've seen from Caitlin a large number of traditional primary sources, we've actually had an enormous amount of communication with living people in order to do this research. And that's a really important part of what we do. I myself am an anthropologist, so that's my training, is how do we work with people as ethical clients or as people who are engaged in our research in fair and equitable ways. So let me go ahead and quickly share some slides with all of you. I hope you're able to see these okay. And I'm going to just quickly take you through first the massive intercultural communication that was necessary just to gather our traditional primary and secondary sources. We needed to do things like work with institutions and people all throughout New England, throughout institutions in the United Kingdom. Thanks to digitization, we were able to sort of silently work with the Canadians, but we also worked with Antigua, Barbados, Jamaica, and even documents linking to British West Africa as we did this. And that required an enormous amount of coordination, talking, asking, understanding different rules and regulations about what can be shared and what can't be shared, which was an important part of the ethics behind our research. Now, even more than that, what was primary to us in the design of the report were our research co-designers, or sometimes archaeologists and others refer to people who are not necessarily paying for a report, but who are profoundly linked with the report as ethical clients. And in this case, those are the lineal descendants of Anthony and Cuba Vassall, who have already self-identified to the Longfellow House in Washington's headquarters. And you'll see here one of our many Zoom meetings. I really hope that people will remember me as something other than the person nagging them to fill out doodle polls at the end of all of this. But for the first several months that we worked together, we met monthly and we asked all kinds of questions. We shared information. We brought in guest experts. You'll see pictured here Hannah Scruggs, who has done a lot of what we call descendant community work in her own research and was able to essentially explain to people who identify as descendants of Anthony and Cuba Vassall the wide range of ways that they might choose to be or not choose to be involved in the research. And we were very sensitive to the fact throughout all of this that we were dealing with private family histories that we were going to be making public in an open access report that would be in the public domain. And that we also were dealing with family histories that were often fraught with potentially violence, with extraordinary difficulty. We didn't want anything that we found to come as a surprise or as some kind of cruel piece of information dropped onto people, but rather as something that we found and worked together to process and understand. So that was a key part of what those meetings were. And I hope that you're able to see in the report that many of the questions we answered are directly drawn from these conversations. We also had the extraordinary opportunity to do research and travel together. So, after several of months of meeting monthly, we moved to quarterly meetings and then by twice a year meetings because we've been working on this project for 3 years. And one of the things that the family members we were in touch with said they most wanted to do was come with us on our research travels. Incredibly, the National Park Service was able to contribute some funds to do that, and then many people contributed their own personal funds as well to make it possible. You'll see a couple of images here of us as researchers in action. This is me and my co-researcher Aabid Allibhai doing what we did all throughout Antigua, basically geolocating, where I have Google Maps drawn up and he has a historical map drawn up, and we're trying to find something of significance to the report so that we can show the family members who are traveling with us. And then you'll see here again Caitlin in action as a storyteller, pointing out at Seville Great House, which is a living history site in Jamaica, some of the important sites of relevance to Black Vassall family history. And these were extraordinary experiences for us as researchers because they helped us to identify some of the ways in which family members would like to see commemoration take place moving forward in relation to Black Vassalls, as well as better understand key questions that underpinned their interest in their family history. We also connected with other organizations and, incredibly, other descendants. There are potentially thousands of descendants who might in some way identify as linked with the history of white vassal enslavement. And you'll see on the image here in the left, members of the family meeting with a staffer at the Jamaica National Library, where they very kindly brought out for us some of the documents that pertained directly to their family. And then, what was for many of us an extremely meaningful visit, we visited St. Elizabeth Parish in Jamaica at the invitation of the Ware Collective, which is a group of architects and historians who have preserved or are trying to now re-preserve post-hurricane damage a house called the Vassall House that is a wattle and red earth traditional mud-based home. And what was really special about this is they hosted us for a meal and for a kind of living history discussion, and they invited many people who share the surname Vassall from the local region to come and visit. And that's how we ended up with this wonderful group photo. Beyond that, members of the descendant community were reviewers of our first full draft and had the opportunity to read everything as it was still in all of its kind of messy beginnings and offer us feedback. And we did that both through soliciting written feedback and in-person or Zoom-based feedback. We had visits to Cambridge and Boston together. This has been an ongoing relationship that we hope will continue for a good amount of time. And then just to conclude, I want you all to know that this is not the end of this research. We are still planning to turn in within the next week or so to Longfellow House, Washington's headquarters, what we call the transfer of knowledge products. And we've done these prioritizing accessibility. So every single site that is mentioned in the report has been mapped out on a Google map that people can download, customize, play around with themselves. It's accompanied by a fully sourced spreadsheet, and you'll just see in a zoomed out version here that we're talking about sites on 4 different continents. So something really special going on there. Our hope is that this will support future researchers, but that it will also inform the descendant community as they attempt to better understand their links to these places. We also have built really dynamic family trees in a tool that many of you might know called Canva, which is free to use with an account and allows you to go in and tinker and move things around yourself, customize, zoom in, zoom out, print out t-shirts, tote bags, whatever you might like related to that family tree. And those are available both for the white vassals who were involved in enslavement via their properties, but then especially for the descendants of Anthony and Cuba Vassall. And accompanying that is a walking tour that we we've built out in ArcGIS story maps, and that will be available to all of you shortly. That you can also get on your phone as much as anything else. You can use it, customize it, do with it as you wish. So I will stop there by saying thank you. If any of you are looking for someone to contact to ask questions about this report, I offer to you my email address, and I promise that I will forward it to any of our team members if I'm unable to answer your question directly. And we're now going to move into question and answer. And I'll just kindly remind you, try to keep your questions focused on the report content and the research process itself, because we're limited in time and we want to make sure that we get to everything together tonight. Thank you all so much for listening, and let's head to the Q&A. Emily, I turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thanks to folks who have already started putting some really thoughtful questions into the chat. Please do keep those coming. We're keeping track. The first question, and we'll go generally in chronological order and see what we can get to. The first question from Liz Covart is, did gender play a role in Massachusetts pension payments? The Royal House discusses a woman who petitioned for a pension, was granted a pension, and yet did not receive any payment or just one payment.
Yeah, that's a great question. Antony and Cuba Vassall were really strategic in the way that they talked about themselves in the petitions. There's actually several petitions, and the first one they submitted together, and that wasn't successful. And so the second petition, Antony positioned himself as a head of household who was taking care of dependents. And that was the petition that was successful. Many of these petitions are successful because they carry with them the sort of the threat of, if you don't grant the petition, then we are going to be impoverished and on the, public assistance, right? And so like it's in the best interests of 18th century ideas about order and family to grant this pension. So they definitely used gender strategically when they're making their case to the Commonwealth. After Antony died, Cuba did petition to get a continuation of his pension, and she got that. It was granted. She only lived 1 year after he did, but she did get it. And there's many other ways that gender, I know I've had many conversations with our co-researcher Rayshauna, especially about how important children and motherhood are to this report. If you read it, you will see that children and motherhood are absolutely at the forefront of this story. And even James Tulip, who was able to get his freedom through pressuring Richard Lechmere through the courts, the reason he was able to pressure him is that his own mother had previously, the year before, had a successful freedom suit of her own. And she successfully argued that because her mother was an indigenous woman, she had been born free and was unlawfully enslaved. And so when she was able to prove her freedom, that then allowed her children to also claim their freedom. So lots of important gender stuff and how the courts relate to all of the members of the family. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. And thanks to Carla for answering some questions in the chat as well. Next question is from Bunmi Aquino Sotu. And the question is, I'm so glad this work centers the Black Vassalls. However, my curiosity is wondering if there are any white vassal descendants alive, and did they contribute to this research?
We did not reach out to any white vassal descendants. I am aware of some of them just sort of in the world. There's actually a great book coming out next month by a historian named Miranda Kaufman, who her book is called Heiresses, and it's about rich white women from who were plantation owners in Jamaica, and she talks about one of the vassals, Elizabeth Vassall, and that branch of the family married into the British aristocracy, right? Her name is Elizabeth Vassall, but she's Lady Holland. If you've ever been to London, Holland Park in London, that's her house. And so they're still around. But we didn't contact them. They might contact us in the future. Yeah.
And I'll just add, I'm a big fan of contacting white descendants, and but I really look at the work that we're doing here as in collaboration with the descendant community that's already identified and that's centered, or their ancestors are centered in this report. And so basically, we're the members of the descendant community today to say, yeah, let's go find us some white vassals. We can absolutely do that. We could, I mean, this is not an impossible thing to do. There's a long history of people doing this kind of thing. And I think that there are lots of possibilities there. So to be continued.
Yeah, and the white vassals married into a lot of very influential families. Some of their descendants married Thomas Jefferson's grandchildren, and like they're out there.
Great. We have a question from Meg Maloney about where Flora was living as an adult. They write, did Flora relocate to Boston near the Arboretum? In 2024, Bussey Street was renamed for a Flora Way. I wonder if it's the same Flora.
That's a great question. Yeah, so Flora married a man named Bristol Miranda, who was from Connecticut, from the Hartford region, and they lived with Darby and Cyrus on Beacon Hill for a little while, but then they moved out to the neighborhood Milk Row. If you're familiar with Somerville, you may know Milk Row or Milk Row Cemetery. That was a neighborhood. It was part of Charlestown then. It's part of Somerville now, and they lived there. Flora, Bristol, and their three children, Susanna, Margaret, and John. And the two daughters, Margaret and Susanna, both married men and moved to Nantucket. And so their families grew up on Nantucket. And there's a wonderful exhibit from the Museum of African American History in Boston that connects the Nantucket and Boston communities together, which I'm sure we can find a link to. But yeah, I'm not sure about the name. As an adult, her surname was Miranda or Mirande. It's spelled many different ways. But yeah.
Thank you. So I will get to a question from Ricky Vassall. And then if we have time for one more, I will come back to another question from Bunmi Akinasotu. So Ricky's question is, were any of the original African surnames recorded or known?
That's a great question, and welcome, Ricky. I'm so glad that you were able to make it. Yeah. So as far as I know, I don't know of any original African surnames that were collected, but what we do have are in the very early 19th century, there were censuses of the plantations in Jamaica, and the Newfound River and Green River, which are two of the big vassal plantations, actually had a lot of information in them. Like they have what they call people's baptismal names and original names, which are often not the same name at all and often contain a surname. In the report, we were able to go through some of those and find family groups, right, by connecting surnames, and sometimes for children, it has the name of their mother. So we were able to use those records to reconstruct some families. Um, and there's also those records also have a lot of elderly people, so you can think about like it does go back some generations. So there's a lot of name information out there, and I know we can connect too about like the Jamaica records about how to access those. Yeah.
Great. Thank you all so much for these wonderful questions. The next question, what kinds of sources from Africa did you all use to inform any of the research questions?
Yeah, so we really relied on some of the outstanding work that's been done by other researchers who have put together resources like the Slave Voyages database and the Legacies of British Slave Ownership database, which you can find in our notes, but also just by Googling, those are two big databases. The Slave Voyages database often has information about where voyages began and ended, where captive Africans were from. And so while we're not 100% sure of people's origins, we are pretty sure that Kuba's mother, Abba, was trafficked from modern day Ghana in the period when between sort of 1710 and 1720, when many, many, many thousands of people were trafficked into Antigua. Um, and we don't know more specifically than that. We also have a lot of letters. So the white vassal family who was involved in slave trading, they were involved in slave trading both in the 17th century and also like after the American Revolution, when they left Boston and went back to England, like some of the sons of the family went back to Africa and worked for the Royal Africa, the Company of African Merchants, I think it was called then, in the 1770s, 1780s. So even very sort of late in this period, they're still in West Africa, and there are letters between them. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And again, Carla was in the chat answering some of the additional questions. We are just about at 7 o'clock. I hope this conversation continues in many other avenues. A lot of appreciation for everyone in the chat. I would leave it to our research team for your final thoughts.
Absolutely. I'll just say, please feel free to reach out to us with any more questions. We do encourage you as much as possible to dig into the report and read it. And then, of course, stay tuned to the Longfellow House website where some of those digital products that I previewed for you will be made available. The timeline for that is sometime this fall. So give them time because they're a small team managing a lot of different things, but they are forthcoming, we promise. And then again, reach out with any other questions. I'll put my email in the chat just so you all have it in a place where you can cut and paste. And Caitlin, I'll give you the last word.
I just wanted to, thank everyone again. This was really a collaborative effort. And as you could hear from the acknowledgments, we worked with a lot of people. And I just appreciate all of your expertise that went into this, but also your expertise going forward. I know that a lot of you are experts or are invested in this work. And so I would just encourage you to keep it going. There are a lot of places in the report where we had to put a pin in it. Carla kept telling me 200 pages, 200 pages. It's a little longer than 200 pages, but there's still plenty of work to do. So thank you so much for your involvement and your encouragement, and we'll go from here.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. We send you our gratitude and our support. And thank you to Anthony and Kuba for forging such an incredible path that we could all follow in this research. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye bye.